He's a driver, not an executive. Tell him to wait outside." The words landed in the lobby like a quiet dismissal, and no one noticed the man holding the car keys had just solved a problem that 3 senior managers had spent all morning arguing about. No one noticed because Ethan Walker never corrected people. He simply nodded, stepped aside, and carried on. The headquarters of Sterling Dynamics overlooked downtown Chicago, its glass walls reflecting a gray autumn sky. Employees hurried across the polished floor with coffee cups and laptops, while Ethan stood near the reception desk in a clean navy jacket issued by the transportation agency that had assigned him to temporary executive driving work. He wasn't supposed to be here long. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Just enough to cover bills. Just enough to keep a promise. Earlier that morning, before sunrise, Ethan had sat at a worn kitchen table in a small brick duplex on the edge of Naperville. A utility bill rested beside a half-finished bowl of cereal. Across from him, his 12-year-old daughter Lily carefully packed a science project into a cardboard box. One corner had come loose during the night. Without a word, Ethan repaired it using a ruler, tape, and 2 spare pieces of cardboard. The structure became stronger than before. Lily smiled. "You always know how to fix things." Ethan only shrugged and handed it back. 20 minutes later, he was helping her carry it through a crowded school hallway, while other parents rushed past with travel mugs and backpacks. Responsibility had become second nature to him. Recognition never had. By 8 o'clock, he was behind the wheel of a black SUV assigned to Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Dynamics. Her schedule was legendary. Investors, acquisitions, board meetings, media appearances. Every minute mattered. Ethan arrived 10 minutes early. Victoria arrived exactly on time. She stepped into the vehicle while scanning emails on her phone. "Temporary driver?" she asked without looking up. "Yes, ma'am. Just get me downtown by 9. Ethan nodded. Nothing more. The city traffic was unusually heavy near Lakeshore Drive. Construction had shut down 2 lanes, and navigation systems were directing everyone into the same bottleneck. Several drivers ahead began making risky merges. Ethan quietly exited 1 block early, took an alternate route through a network of side streets, and reached the meeting 7 minutes ahead of schedule. Victoria glanced up from her phone for the first time. Lucky guess. Ethan simply opened her door. "Have a good meeting, ma'am." She walked away before he could answer. Inside the building, executives praised Victoria's punctual arrival. No one asked how she got there. No one noticed the driver waiting outside in the cold. Around noon, Ethan parked near a neighborhood diner while waiting for the next pickup request. The waitress behind the counter recognized him from previous visits. "The usual?" she asked. "Coffee only today." She noticed but didn't comment. Ethan unfolded a letter he had collected from his mailbox that morning. The envelope bore the logo of Lily's school district. Tuition assistance had been denied. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it away before finishing his coffee. His face remained calm, but his grip tightened around the cup for a brief second. Across town, a crisis was unfolding at Sterling Dynamics. A major client presentation scheduled for the next morning had gone wrong. Critical logistics data contained errors. Departments blamed one another. Voices rose. Meetings multiplied. Yet when Victoria left the building that evening, frustrated and exhausted, she found something unexpected waiting in the SUV. A printed folder sat neatly on the center console. On the cover was a handwritten note. "These shipment projections appear inconsistent with regional fuel reports. You may want someone to review pages 12 through 15. Victoria Froneth." She opened the folder. The corrections were precise. Detailed, impossible for a temporary driver to notice. Her eyes narrowed. "Who prepared this?" she asked. Ethan looked at the road ahead. "I noticed a few numbers didn't match." Silence filled the vehicle. Outside, streetlights reflected across the windshield as Chicago settled into evening. Victoria stared at the pages again. There was no signature, no explanation, just accurate observations that might save a multi-million-dollar account. For the first time, she looked at Ethan Walker not as a driver, but as a question she couldn't answer. And the more she thought about those corrections, the more one unsettling realization began to form. Someone had made a serious mistake about who Ethan Walker really was. Victoria Sterling read the folder 3 times before she finally set it down. The corrections were not guesses. They were precise, supported by publicly available fuel indexes, transportation forecasts, and regional shipping patterns. The kind of observations normally made by analysts who earned 6-figure salaries. Yet the note had come from a temporary driver. The next morning, she walked into the executive conference room, carrying the folder. Senior managers were already seated around a polished walnut table overlooking the Chicago skyline. "Who caught the discrepancy?" one vice president asked. Victoria paused for a moment. "Someone outside the department." The room exchanged skeptical looks. Nobody pressed further. But for the first time, she found herself wondering what Ethan Walker did before he started driving people around the city. Meanwhile, Ethan's day began the way most of his days did. Before sunrise, he stood in a grocery store comparing prices on cereal boxes while mentally calculating the week's budget. A folded utility bill remained tucked inside his jacket pocket. Every dollar mattered. Lily needed new shoes for winter. Her science club registration fee was due next month. And despite everything, Ethan still slipped an extra carton of milk into the shopping cart because he knew she loved cereal before school. At 7:30, he dropped her off in front of Jefferson Middle School. Students streamed through the school hallway carrying backpacks and poster boards. Lily hesitated before stepping out of the car. "Dad, the regional science competition announced finalists today." Ethan smiled. "Then they will be lucky to have you." She laughed. "That is not how judging works." "Maybe not," he said, "but hard work usually gets noticed eventually." After she disappeared inside, Ethan remained parked for a moment longer. Through the windshield, he watched a maintenance worker struggling to push a cart through a side entrance. Without hesitation, Ethan got out and helped steady the load before heading back to work. He never mentioned it. The man barely knew his name. By mid-morning, Victoria had another packed schedule. Investor meetings, site inspections, endless phone calls. Yet during a stop outside a suburban manufacturing facility, she noticed something unusual. While waiting beside the SUV, Ethan was reviewing a stack of transportation reports left behind by one of her managers. Not browsing, studying. His eyes moved quickly across the pages. When a logistics director approached and jokingly asked whether he was preparing for a promotion, several employees laughed. Ethan simply handed back the documents. One of the freight assumptions might create delays in Indiana. The director smirked. "Thanks. I think our analyst can handle it." Ethan nodded and stepped aside. No argument. No wounded pride. Hours later, the same director received confirmation that a major shipment route was indeed at risk of delay. The realization lingered with him far longer than he cared to admit. That evening, dark clouds rolled across the city as Ethan picked Victoria up outside corporate headquarters. Rain streaked the windshield while traffic slowed to a crawl. Victoria sat quietly in the back seat longer than usual. Finally, she spoke. "Where did you learn so much about logistics?" Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "I read. Most people do not read supply chain forecasts for fun." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Most people have more exciting hobbies." Victoria studied his reflection in the mirror. There was no arrogance in his answer, no attempt to impress her, just calm certainty, the kind that comes from experience. As they pulled into the underground parking garage, her phone rang. The call lasted less than 30 seconds, but when she hung up, the color had drained from her face. A critical client was demanding an emergency meeting the next morning. The account represented hundreds of jobs and millions of dollars. Several executives were already panicking. Victoria stared ahead in silence. Then, unexpectedly, Ethan spoke. "You might want to review the Ohio distribution numbers before that meeting." Victoria looked up sharply. "How did you know it was the Ohio account?" Ethan paused. For the first time since she had met him, he seemed to weigh whether he should answer. Then he simply opened the driver's door and stepped into the rain. And Victoria was left wondering how a temporary driver seemed to know more about her company's biggest problems than some of the people sitting in her boardroom. The next morning began under a blanket of low gray clouds. Chicago looked muted, almost thoughtful, as Ethan guided the SUV through early commuter traffic. Victoria sat in the back seat reviewing notes for the emergency meeting, but her attention kept drifting toward a question she could not shake. How had he known about the Ohio account? She had not mentioned it. Neither had anyone else within earshot. Yet Ethan drove as if nothing unusual had happened. Calm, focused, unconcerned with whether anyone understood him. At a red light near a neighborhood bakery, Victoria finally lowered her tablet. "You never answered my question." Ethan glanced briefly in the mirror. "Which one?" "How you knew about Ohio." The light turned green. He eased forward. "Patterns." Victoria frowned. "Patterns. Problems usually leave clues before they become emergencies." That was all he said. No dramatic explanation. No attempt to impress her. The answer should have been frustrating. Instead, it stayed with her. By mid-morning, Sterling Dynamics was operating under pressure. Executives hurried through glass corridors, carrying reports and laptops. The atmosphere felt like a hospital waiting room before important news arrived. Ethan remained outside in the executive parking area, where rows of black sedans reflected the cloudy sky. While waiting, he noticed a young employee standing beside a pickup truck with a flat tire. The man looked overwhelmed and late for work. Without being asked, Ethan retrieved a portable inflator and toolkit from the SUV. 20 minutes later, the tire was repaired. The employee repeatedly offered money. Ethan refused with a polite shake of his head. "Just get to work." The young man left grateful and confused. Acts like that seemed natural to Ethan. Yet more people were beginning to notice. Inside the boardroom, the Ohio meeting was tense. Numbers flashed across screens. Questions flew from every direction. Then something unexpected happened. The projections Ethan had indirectly warned about proved accurate. Several executives sat in uncomfortable silence as overlooked risks emerged one by one. The account was saved, but barely. When a meeting ended, Victoria found herself thinking less about the crisis and more about the man waiting downstairs. Late that afternoon, she made an unusual decision. Instead of working through lunch, she instructed Ethan to stop at a small diner outside the city center. It was the kind of place with red vinyl booths, handwritten pie specials, and framed high school football photos on the walls. She expected him to wait in the SUV. Instead, she surprised herself. "You should eat too." Ethan hesitated. "I am working." "So am I." After a moment, he nodded. They sat at separate sides of a corner booth. For several minutes, neither said much. The hum of conversation filled the room. Coffee cups clinked against saucers. A local weather report played quietly near the counter. Then the waitress brought Ethan a slice of apple pie he had not ordered. "On the house," she said with a smile. "For helping my son with his math last month." Victoria looked up. "You tutor math?" Ethan seemed almost embarrassed by the attention. "Just occasionally." The waitress laughed. "Occasionally? My son went from failing algebra to making honor roll." After she walked away, Victoria studied him carefully. Driver, mechanic, logistics expert, math tutor. None of it fit together. Yet somehow all of it felt genuine. There was no performance in him. No need to advertise his value. For the first time, Victoria found herself respecting something she could not fully explain. As they left the diner, Ethan's phone vibrated. He checked the screen, and a shadow crossed his face for the first time. It was a message from Lily's school. The regional science competition finalists had been announced. Ethan read the message twice before slipping the phone back into his pocket. Victoria noticed the change immediately. What she did not know was that the message contained news that could alter everything Ethan had been working toward for his daughter. The message stayed with Ethan for the rest of the afternoon. Lily had not been selected as a finalist for the regional science competition. She had spent months building her project, staying up late at the kitchen table while he reviewed diagrams beside stacks of unpaid bills and grocery receipts. Now the opportunity was gone. Ethan never complained, but disappointment settled quietly behind his eyes. As they drove back toward downtown Chicago, Victoria noticed the difference. "Bad news?" she asked. Ethan kept his attention on the road. "My daughter worked hard for something." He paused. Sometimes hard work is not enough. Victoria expected bitterness. Instead, she heard acceptance. Not surrender, just the calm understanding of a man who had learned life was not always fair. The next morning, Sterling Dynamics buzzed with preparation for an upcoming investor presentation. Executives hurried through glass hallways carrying tablets and briefing folders. Rumors about the Ohio account had spread throughout the building. Some employees had begun whispering about the temporary driver who somehow noticed problems before entire departments did. Others dismissed it as luck. One senior manager, Richard Halpern, was particularly skeptical. He had spent 20 years climbing corporate ladders and had little patience for stories about gifted drivers. People see one coincidence and start inventing legends, he told colleagues near the coffee station. Unfortunately, Ethan overheard the comment while delivering Victoria to the building. He showed no reaction, no defense, no dissentment. He simply wished the receptionist a good morning and returned to the parking garage. That same afternoon, a severe storm rolled across northern Illinois. Rain hammered the city. Wind rattled office windows. Schools released students early. Around 3 o'clock, Ethan received a call from Lily. Her voice was calm, but disappointed. The school bus route had been canceled because of flooding near several neighborhoods. Without hesitation, Ethan informed dispatch that he would need a brief personal stop between assignments. Then he drove through heavy traffic toward Jefferson Middle School. The school hallway was crowded with anxious parents and restless students. Ethan arrived carrying an extra raincoat. Not for Lily. For another student standing alone near the entrance without one. The boy's mother was running late. Ethan quietly handed over the coat and waited in the lobby until both children had rides home. Small things. Ordinary things. Yet they revealed the kind of man he was when nobody important was watching. Except someone was watching. Victoria. Her afternoon meeting had ended early because of the weather, and she happened to arrive just as Ethan was helping organize students near the pickup line. She remained inside the SUV, unseen, observing the scene unfold. The image unsettled her. Nothing about Ethan fit the assumptions she had made. He solved problems without recognition. He helped people without calculation. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew far more than he revealed. Yet he lived like a man struggling to pay utility bills and raise a daughter alone. The contradiction made no sense. Later that evening, another surprise arrived. During a review of archive company records, Victoria stumbled across an old industry article from nearly a decade earlier. A photograph accompanied the piece. The image was grainy, but the face instantly caught her attention. She leaned closer to the screen. The man in the article looked remarkably familiar. The same steady eyes, the same quiet expression. Her heart skipped. Before she could read the full story, Richard Halpern entered her office carrying urgent presentation materials. Victoria minimized the article without thinking. The moment passed, but long after everyone else left the building, she found herself staring at the dark city skyline and wondering why a temporary driver appeared in a publication written for some of the most respected leaders in American business. And the answer, still hidden just out of reach, was beginning to feel far more important than she ever expected. The article stayed in Victoria's mind all night. By sunrise, she was back in her office, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside her laptop. Outside her window, Chicago traffic crawled across wet streets left behind by yesterday's storm. She reopened the archived industry publication and finally read beyond the photograph. The headline was nearly 10 years old. It featured a transportation technology company that had revolutionized regional freight forecasting. The article highlighted a young operations strategist whose models had saved manufacturers millions of dollars during a nationwide supply chain disruption. The name beneath the photograph stopped her cold. Ethan Walker. Victoria leaned back slowly. The man driving her SUV had once been quoted alongside respected executives and industry leaders. She read every line. Awards, consulting contracts, conference appearances. Then the trail suddenly ended. No scandal, no public failure, just silence. By the time Ethan arrived for work that morning, Victoria viewed him through entirely different eyes. Yet the discovery only deepened the mystery. Why would someone with that background be struggling to pay utility bills and working temporary driving assignments? The answer remained hidden. Later that morning, Sterling Dynamics faced another challenge. A major manufacturing partner reported unexpected disruptions that threatened next quarter's delivery schedule. Executives crowded into a conference room while analysts scrambled through spreadsheets. Victoria spent the first hour listening to competing opinions. None felt convincing. Through the glass wall, she noticed Ethan waiting near the reception area. He sat quietly reading while employees rushed around him. The contrast struck her. Finally, she made a decision she could not have imagined making a week earlier. She stepped outside and approached him directly. "I would like your opinion on something." Ethan looked genuinely surprised. "My opinion? 5 minutes." Several executives exchanged skeptical glances as she brought him into the meeting. Richard Halpern looked especially irritated. The room fell silent. Victoria explained the disruption and placed several reports on the table. Ethan reviewed them without theatrics. No dramatic pauses. No attempt to command attention. After several minutes, he pointed toward one section. "Your supplier is solving the wrong problem." A few managers immediately objected. Ethan remained calm. He asked 3 questions, then 2 more. Each answer revealed another overlooked issue. Gradually, the room grew quieter. Within 20 minutes, the real source of the disruption became clear. The problem was not manufacturing capacity. It was transportation timing between distribution hubs, something no one had fully investigated. Victoria watched the room change. Not because Ethan demanded respect, because competence had a way of making noise unnecessary. By late afternoon, the proposed solution was already being implemented. The mood throughout headquarters improved noticeably. Yet Ethan seemed unaffected by the praise. When the meeting ended, he quietly returned to his usual responsibilities. On the drive home, Victoria asked the question she could no longer avoid. "You used to work in operations strategy." Ethan gripped the steering wheel but said nothing for several seconds. The city passed outside the windows. A church parking lot stood nearly empty beneath the fading evening light. Finally, he nodded. "A long time ago, you were very successful." Another pause. Success changes. Victoria expected a story filled with resentment or excuses. Instead, she heard acceptance again. The same quiet dignity that appeared whenever life disappointed him. Before she could ask more, his phone rang through the vehicle speakers. The caller ID showed Jefferson Middle School. Ethan answered immediately. His expression changed. Lily's science teacher explained that a review committee had discovered an administrative scoring error. Her project had never been evaluated correctly. She was now being reconsidered for the regional competition. Hope flickered across Ethan's face for the first time in days. It was brief but unmistakable. Victoria saw it, and in that moment, she learned something more important than his professional past. Beneath all the hidden expertise, all the unanswered questions, the thing Ethan valued most was still waiting for him at home. But neither of them realized that his rediscovered reputation inside Sterling Dynamics had already attracted the attention of someone determined to prove he did not belong there. Word spread faster than Ethan wanted. Within a few days, people throughout Sterling Dynamics knew the temporary driver had helped uncover problems that experienced managers had missed. Some employees were impressed. Others were suspicious. Richard Halpern belonged firmly in the second group. From his corner office, he watched Victoria increasingly seek Ethan's perspective on operational issues. To Richard, it felt like an insult to years of corporate experience. To Victoria, it felt like common sense. Results were difficult to ignore. Early Monday morning, Ethan sat at the kitchen table reviewing Lily's revised competition paperwork. Beside him lay a utility bill, a grocery receipt, and a handwritten checklist for the week. Lily entered carrying a binder filled with science notes. "They are really looking at my project again," she said. Ethan smiled. "Because your work deserves to be seen." She studied him carefully. "You sound more confident than I am." That is one of a parent's job descriptions. Her laugh filled the small kitchen. Moments like that mattered more to him than any title ever had. Later that day, Sterling Dynamics received unexpected news. The transportation adjustment Ethan had helped identify was already producing measurable improvements. Delayed shipments were moving again. Client confidence was recovering. Several executives privately admitted they had overlooked warning signs. Yet instead of celebrating, Ethan returned to waiting areas, parking garages, and long hours behind the wheel. He seemed completely uninterested in credit. That fact puzzled Victoria more than anything else. During a midday stop near a grocery store outside Aurora, she stepped out to take a call. When she returned, she found Ethan helping an elderly woman load bags in her trunk. The woman's hands trembled from arthritis. Ethan worked quietly, then returned to the SUV as if nothing unusual had happened. Victoria watched him through the windshield. "Do you always stop for strangers?" she asked once they were back on the road. Ethan shrugged. "Sometimes people need 10 minutes more than you need 10 minutes." The answer stayed with her long after the conversation ended. It was not clever. It was not rehearsed. It was simply how he viewed the world. Meanwhile, Richard began digging into Ethan's past. He searched old records, professional databases, archived articles. What he found raised even more questions. Ethan's career had not ended because of incompetence. By every available measure, he had been successful, highly successful. Yet the public record simply stopped several years earlier. Richard found the gap suspicious, and suspicious people often assume the worst. Midweek brought another challenge. A major investor unexpectedly requested a private review of Sterling Dynamics' expansion strategy. Several departments scrambled to prepare supporting material. During a discussion outside the conference room, an analyst mentioned a risk no one had properly addressed. The room fell silent. Then Ethan, who had been waiting nearby, quietly suggested a framework for evaluating the issue. Within minutes, the conversation shifted. The solution worked. Again, more executives noticed. More questions followed. Victoria no longer saw a driver who occasionally made insightful observations. She saw someone deliberately choosing a simpler life despite possessing abilities that could place him in almost any boardroom in America. The mystery was becoming impossible to ignore. That evening, after dropping Victoria off, Ethan stopped by a church parking lot where Lily Science Mentor volunteered twice a week. Together, they reviewed her project revisions under the glow of parking lot lights. Ethan listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and encouraged her to trust her work. He never tried to take over. He simply gave her confidence. As they drove home, Lily looked out the window and smiled. Ethan thought the hardest part might finally be behind them. But the next morning, Richard Halpern walked into Victoria's office carrying a thick folder. "I found something about Ethan Walker," he said. "And if I am right, he should never have been allowed anywhere near this company." Victoria looked up sharply. The confidence in Richard's voice was unmistakable. And for the first time since meeting Ethan, a shadow of doubt entered the room. Victoria opened the folder expecting evidence of misconduct. Instead, she found something far more complicated. Richard had assembled articles, conference transcripts, industry awards, and archived interviews spanning nearly 15 years. Ethan Walker had not merely worked in operations strategy. He had helped build forecasting systems that several major transportation companies still used. His research had been cited in trade publications. His recommendations had shaped regional logistics networks across multiple states. Yet one page near the back of the folder caught Richard's attention. It described a major corporate restructuring that occurred shortly before Ethan disappeared from public view. "People do not walk away from careers like this without a reason," Richard said. "Either he is hiding something or he wants something." Victoria studied the documents in silence. Nothing she saw matched the man she had come to know. Not because the records contradicted him, because they explained him. The calm observations, the ability to identify problems others missed, the absence of ego. Suddenly, the pieces began fitting together. Yet one question remained unanswered. Why leave? That afternoon, Ethan spent his lunch break at a small diner near Jefferson Middle School. Lily sat across from him, reviewing notes for the science competition reconsideration process. A basket of fries sat untouched between them while she explained a flaw she had discovered in her own project. Ethan listened carefully. Instead of correcting her, he asked questions until she found the solution herself. The waitress who knew them well smiled as she refilled their drinks. "You know," she said to Lily, "your dad should be teaching classes somewhere." Ethan laughed softly. "One student is enough." Lily grinned. The exchange lasted only seconds, but it revealed something Victoria would later understand. Ethan did not measure success by recognition. He measured it by responsibility. Meanwhile, inside Sterling Dynamics, Richard continued raising concerns. Several managers had begun openly seeking Ethan's advice on operational issues. One analyst even credited him for helping avoid a costly forecasting mistake. The results were becoming impossible to dismiss. Yet Richard interpreted every success as further proof that Ethan was somehow manipulating perceptions. Skepticism had become personal. Late that week, another challenge emerged. A supplier threatened to withdraw from an important contract unless unresolved planning concerns were addressed immediately. Victoria assembled a small review group. This time, several executives specifically requested Ethan's presence. The room itself reflected how much had changed. Weeks earlier, some of the same people had barely acknowledged him. Now, they listened when he spoke. Ethan reviewed the information quietly before identifying a communication gap between departments. The issue was corrected within hours. The supplier remained. Another crisis faded. Respect spread further. Yet Ethan never acted differently afterward. When the meeting ended, he drove Victoria to a suburban office park, then stopped at a grocery store on the way home to buy discounted vegetables and cereal for Lily. The contrast between his expertise and his daily life became increasingly difficult to ignore. That evening, Victoria finally asked the question directly. They sat parked outside a school gymnasium where Lily attended a science workshop. Parents waited inside the lobby while students worked on presentations. "Why did you leave?" she asked gently. Ethan stared through the windshield for several moments. Children crossed the parking lot carrying project boards and backpacks. Finally, he answered, "Because some things become more important than a career." Victoria did not interrupt. "My wife became sick," he continued. "After she passed away, my daughter needed a father more than the industry needed another consultant." His voice remained steady, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. For the first time, Victoria saw the full outline of the man behind the mystery. Not a fallen executive, not someone hiding from failure. A father who had made a choice few people would have understood. And yet, even as her respect deepened, neither of them realized that Richard was preparing to challenge Ethan publicly. A board review had been scheduled for the following week, and Richard intended to make sure everyone questioned whether Ethan Walker truly belonged inside Sterling Dynamics at all. The board review arrived on a cold Thursday morning, and the atmosphere inside Sterling Dynamics felt different from every meeting that had come before it. Executives filled the conference room. Department heads reviewed reports. Outside the glass walls, employees moved through hallways carrying coffee cups and laptops, unaware that a quiet storm was about to break. Ethan had no reason to expect trouble. He spent the early morning exactly as he always did. He drove Lily to school, helped her carry a presentation board through the crowded school hallway, and reminded her to trust her work. The reconsideration committee would announce its final decision about the science competition later that day. Lily smiled bravely, but he could see the nervousness behind it. "Whatever happens," Ethan told her, "I am already proud of you." Then he drove toward downtown Chicago, unaware that his own day was about to change. Inside the boardroom, Richard Halpern began presenting his concerns. At first, the discussion sounded professional. Then the tone shifted. He displayed articles about Ethan's former career. He highlighted the years Ethan had spent advising major companies. He questioned why someone with that background had inserted himself into internal operations discussions while employed only as a temporary driver. The implication was subtle but clear. Richard suggested that Ethan had intentionally gained influence without authorization. Some board members frowned. Others exchanged uncertain glances. Facts were being presented, but context was missing. Victoria pushed back immediately. She pointed to the problems Ethan had helped solve. The contracts preserved. The operational risks identified. Yet Richard had chosen his argument carefully. He was not attacking Ethan's competence. He was attacking trust, and trust was harder to defend than results. By afternoon, rumors had spread throughout the company. Conversations stopped when Ethan entered break rooms. Employees who had recently sought his advice suddenly avoided eye contact. A few wondered whether Richard was right. Others simply stayed silent. Ethan noticed the change, but said nothing. He continued doing his job. He drove. He waited. He carried himself with the same quiet dignity he always had. Yet the isolation hurt more than he admitted. Late in the day, another blow arrived. While checking his mailbox at home between assignments, he found a formal notice from the temporary employment agency. Sterling Dynamics had requested a review of his assignment pending internal concerns. His position was not terminated. Not yet, but the message was clear. The opportunity could disappear at any moment. Ethan folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Then he sat alone in his pickup truck for several minutes before starting the engine. The risk was not just financial. Losing the assignment could jeopardize the stability he had worked so hard to create for Lily. That evening, he arrived at Jefferson Middle School just in time for the science committee announcement. Parents filled the gymnasium bleachers. Students sat together, clutching project binders and poster boards. Ethan spotted Lily immediately. She searched the crowd until she found him and smiled. For a moment, everything else faded away. Then the announcements began. Names were called. Applause echoed across the room. Ethan watched Lily's hopeful expression slowly change. Her name never came. Despite the scoring correction, she had not been selected. The disappointment on her face hit harder than any boardroom accusation ever could. On the drive home, she stared out the window in silence. Ethan wanted to fix it, wanted to protect her from the unfairness of the moment. But some hurts could not be repaired with advice. All he could do was be present. When they reached home, Lily finally spoke. Maybe I just was not good enough. Ethan parked beside the curb and turned toward her immediately. Do not ever confuse an outcome with your value. His voice was gentle but firm. Yet after she went inside, he remained sitting alone in the darkness. For the first time in years, he felt pulled in every direction at once. His reputation was under attack. His job was at risk. His daughter was hurting. And the people who had begun to trust him seemed to be drifting away. Across town, Victoria sat alone in her office long after sunset. Richard's accusations replayed in her mind. So did every action she had witnessed from Ethan. The two versions of the man simply did not match. Then her eyes landed on a sealed archive file she had requested that afternoon. The file contained records from the company Ethan left years ago. Records nobody at Sterling Dynamics had reviewed yet. Slowly, she reached for it, because somewhere inside that folder was the truth. And by this time tomorrow, someone was finally going to hear the whole story. Victoria opened the archive file before sunrise. The city outside her office windows was still dark, streetlights reflecting off wet pavement below. Inside the folder was not a scandal, not a lawsuit, not a professional failure. Instead, it documented a decision. Years earlier, Ethan Walker had been offered a senior executive position after helping save a major transportation company from collapse during a national logistics crisis. The promotion would have doubled his income. Industry publications predicted he would become one of the most influential strategists in the country. Yet attached to the offer was a letter declining the role. The reason was simple. His wife had entered intensive treatment, and he wanted to spend whatever time remained with his family. The records showed he gradually stepped away from consulting projects, rejected lucrative contracts, and eventually left the industry almost entirely. Not because he failed, because he chose people over prestige. Victoria sat motionless. The silence in her office felt heavier than any board meeting she had ever attended. Everything she had seen now made sense. The humility, the absence of ego, the way he never chased recognition. Ethan had already given up something most ambitious people spend their entire lives pursuing. Later that morning, the board reconvened. Richard Halpern arrived confident. Several executives appeared uncertain. Rumors still lingered throughout the company. Ethan had been asked to attend, though no one had explained why. He entered quietly, taking a seat near the end of the conference table. No lawyer, no prepared defense, just the same calm presence he carried everywhere. Richard began speaking first. He repeated concerns about influence, transparency, and professional boundaries. For a few minutes, the room listened. Then Victoria stood. She placed the archive file on the table and opened it. What followed changed everything. She walked the board through Ethan's documented career, the innovations, the achievements, the forecasting systems still in use across the industry. Then she revealed the decision that had never made headlines. The decision to walk away. The decision to care for his wife. The decision to raise Lily after her mother's death. No embellishment. No dramatic language. Just facts. One by one, the assumptions people had built around Ethan collapsed. The room grew quieter with every page. By the time Victoria finished, nobody was speaking. Richard stared at the documents. Several board members lowered their eyes. A senior executive who had once dismissed Ethan as a lucky driver slowly removed his glasses. The room went silent. Not because they had discovered a powerful executive hiding among them, because they finally understood the measure of his character. Victoria turned toward Ethan. "You never told anyone." Ethan looked around the table. Nobody asked. A few people smiled sadly. Others looked embarrassed. The silence remained. Not uncomfortable now. Respectful. The kind that arrives when truth finally catches up with perception. The board unanimously ended the review. The employment agency concern was withdrawn immediately. More importantly, several executives personally apologized. Ethan accepted every apology with the same grace he had shown through every misunderstanding. He did not lecture anyone. He did not seek vindication. He simply moved forward. That afternoon brought another surprise. While Ethan waited near the school parking lot outside Jefferson Middle School, Lily came running toward his pickup truck holding an envelope. Her face was glowing. After the committee reviewed the scoring correction and additional evaluations, a special recommendation had been approved. Her project would advance after all. Ethan stepped out of the truck as she threw her arms around him. For a moment, the pressure of the previous weeks disappeared. Not because life had suddenly become perfect, but because perseverance, honesty, and patience had finally been given a chance. Several days later, Victoria stopped by the same small diner where she and Ethan had shared lunch. She found him sitting in a booth reviewing science competition schedules while Lily worked through calculations beside him. Nothing about him had changed. He was still the same father balancing responsibilities, still helping when nobody noticed, still choosing people before status. Victoria slid into the booth across from them. "You know," she said softly, "you could probably run half the companies in this city." Ethan smiled and looked at Lily. "Maybe." Then he folded the schedule and placed it back on the table. "But this is where I need to be right now." Victoria understood. Finally, completely understood. Respect is not created by titles. Character is not measured by income. And some of the strongest people in the room are the ones who quietly sacrifice recognition for responsibility. As evening sunlight filtered through the diner windows and laughter drifted from nearby tables, the future remained unwritten. But one thing was certain. Ethan Walker no longer needed anyone's approval to prove his worth. His dignity had never depended on being recognized. Yet when recognition finally came, it arrived for exactly the right reason. Not because of who he had once been, but because of who he chose to be every single day.